Booktube. I'm here with a wrap-up. It's been a long time since I've done a wrap-up. So I'm going to be talking about books that I read from April into some of June, and I'm going to be doing another video where I talk about June into August, just because there are so many books. I wanted to split it up almost evenly. So yeah, this is just a general wrap-up. I have nothing prepared for this. I'm just going off a list of books that I've read and trying to remember. And just to let you know, this is what my shirt says, because it annoys me when people wear shirts with sayings and you can't see the bottom half of it. So yeah, let's just hop right into it. Flights by Olga Tokarczuk. I told you I didn't prepare anything. And I'm like, have a similar CZ situation going on in my own last name, so it's interesting. Tokarczuk, sure. Anyways, so yeah, this was me giving her a second chance, and I'm kind of glad I did. I really did not enjoy Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead, just because of characterization issues. The writing was really interesting, but yeah. So yeah, this is a series of short interconnected stories that are kind of also separated and interspersed with each other. It's like kind of like a copy and paste, cut and paste, not copy and paste, cut and paste kind of thing, where you get like the beginning of one story and then something else comes in and then it pops up somewhere else down the line. And so yeah, it was quite interesting. I really enjoyed the writing. Some of the ideas she presented were also pretty cool. It was back in April, so don't ask me what any of those ideas were. I just thought it was quite interesting. Also, it was a library book, so I can't pick it up and check it. So, as I just said, these are my random thoughts. So I read Flights. I kind of enjoyed it. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. Yeah, so I'm glad I gave her a second chance. I don't often give authors second chances, but as I said, there were still some... I saw some good stuff in Drive Your Plows Over the Bone of the Dead that didn't discourage me from picking up more of her stuff. Yeah, what else can I say about Flights? There was one character, I think her own personal input, that I did have trouble with. I was like, this is not a person I'd like. I don't really want to read about them, but the other stories were interesting enough that it compelled me to keep reading. And mostly kind of, I didn't read as closely her sections as I did the sections of the other people. Okay, then I read Harvest by Tess. My screen is really small here. Let's make it bigger. Tess Gerritsen. And this is interesting. She was a doctor, and then she went into writing. And so this is the story of, I guess you could tell by the title, harvesting bodies for parts. It involves child trafficking, and using the children for body parts. So we follow her, and we follow a little boy who's been kidnapped. And it's just like a medical thriller. It was thrilling enough to keep going on. It had me guessing. I thought I knew who the bad guy was, and there were enough clues that I wasn't so surprised when it was revealed. But there were still enough doubts that I was still, pleasantly surprised at the same time. Like I was just like, could be, it couldn't be. I can see it going either way here. Yeah. So it was worth reading. Just something, I don't need every book to be like mind-blowing and thought-provoking, and sometimes I just want something fun and disturbing. Like Harvest. So I gave that a 3 out of 5 stars. Then I fell into the booktube hype, and I got Before the Coffee Gets Cold, and I'm glad I did. That is by Toshikazu Kawaguchi, and you probably heard about this book. It's about this cafe, that's what they're called, where if you go sit in a certain spot and you order a coffee, you can go back in time, but you have to be back before your coffee gets cold, and you can't do anything to change the past. And it was interesting. It was this little, I don't know if heartwarming is the right word, because some of it's really sad, but it's touching, saccharine, yeah, nice little read. And I gave that 4.5 stars. nothing much more to say about it. I'm sure a lot of it's been said before. Then I picked up Fierce Femmes and Notorious Liars by Cheng Thom, and this was a really fun book. And it's about this trans girl who, it's fictional, like it's a fantasy world, because there's like mermaids. They go to the beach at one point and they're like helping mermaids who have been caught in an oil spill. But it's also set in Canada. So like a fantastical, I recognize Toronto's, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So she runs away from, her coastal town to Toronto, escaping her family because she doesn't think they'll accept her. And it's mixed with like some real life things and then like this fantasy superhero element where she joins this gang of girls who go around and beat up men. They said, we're not going to wait. It starts off with a sexual assault, and it's not just hidden there. It's obvious, this is things that happen in real life. It starts with a sexual assault of a trans woman, and they go out and they know the police aren't going to do anything, so they go out and they beat up this guy. And then they decide that they're going to be preemptive. They're going to go out and they're going to just not wait for the sexual assault to happen. They're just going to go out and they're going to be preemptive vigilantes. And it's quite interesting. It's quite fun. And they don't just, it's not just purely accepted. Like there's discussions about that and why should we do it? Why shouldn't we do it? Mixed in with like the story of this girl going through going through transitions. It's pretty cool. I liked it. And then I read Red X by David Demchuk. This is another gay Canadian novel. I really thoroughly enjoyed this one. I gave Fierce Femmes 5 stars as well. It was really interesting. And Red X I'm talking about now. So I'm doing a whole video about this. I'm so excited about it. This book is really cool. Another one of my favorite books from this year. So this is, how am I going to describe it? In 2010 to 2017, there were a series of murders of gay men in the gay village in Toronto. And this book was inspired by those murders, but it puts like a supernatural twist on it. So we follow from the 1980s. I think it starts with the beginning of the AIDS crisis. In the 1980s, these men just, as they're being murdered or as their friends are being murdered, and they're all kind of interconnected. There's some characters who are recognized throughout. But as I said, there's like this big supernatural element, and you don't really know until later on, so I can't talk too much about that. But what's also interesting is that we have these fiction stories based on real life, but then we also have David Demchuk putting his real life into it as well. So like you get they're not like chapters, they're more like long short stories. They're probably about like 50-60 pages each, and then you get a section it's almost like you're reading David Demchuk's journal. So he's telling you about his life, about him growing up. I think there's some fictionalized elements put into it to kind of tie it into the story. I don't know too much about what's fiction, what's not there, but enough of it is his real life. And at one point, we also get like an essay on using queer people as villains and queer people in horror, which was really interesting because that's like very meta, because what you're reading is you have queer villains, and the implications of that. So it's really quite cool. I highly recommend it. And then I read a totally different note, The Junior King by Troy Denning. This is a Star Wars novel. This takes place, it's no longer considered canon. Disney just, there's too much going on with Star Wars now. I don't want to have to watch like 3 TV shows and watch a movie and like read 5 books in order to understand everything that's going on. So I'm going to stick with the old stuff where you can just read it whenever you want, however you want. As long as you've seen the original movies, you're good. So these take place, we're following the kids of Luke, Leia, and Han Solo. And Luke, Leia, and Han Solo as well. And their kids kind of get trapped in this cult, almost like you get a hive mind situation where the insects a literal hive mind. It's trying to get people to help them, but it's also like kind of like, yeah, you're asking for help, but you're not letting people say no at the same time. So it's a really interesting dynamic there. And we have what I really liked about these novels, and the direction that it went after the original trilogy, is that they do away with like light side, dark side stuff. They're just like, it isn't just because dark side people are using certain skills. Okay, how do I explain this? There's certain skills that were only used by people on the dark side, right? And there are certain skills that were only used by people on the light side. And what they said is like, those skills don't matter. Those methods don't matter. What matters is your intention behind it, and that determines whether you're light or dark. Which is something I'm very disappointed that the last 3 trilogy movies didn't do, and they touched upon it in the second movie. I was like, yeah, we're gonna get a gray Jedi, and they didn't. And I'm not gonna go off on a Star Wars tangent, but you know. You know. Okay. Anyway, so yeah, that was an enjoyable one. I didn't realize that it was a second trilogy in a larger series. I hate when books do that too. Just, anyways, but I could still understand everything that was going on. They gave enough background information that you could join there, and I liked it so much that I found the second book at the thrift store and I bought it. Then I read Revenant Gun by Yoon Lee. I love this series. This is the Machineries of War series. We are following, I'm horrible with names though. We're following the same guy we followed in all the other ones. It's, how do I explain it? It's complicated to explain, but it's worth it. It is really cool. It's a science fiction series where they use math and calculations to wage war, and it has different effects on reality, and everyone has to follow the same calendar system, or like physics doesn't work the same way. Like, it's really quite complicated. And we follow this one guy who was a general who committed this atrocious act that almost genocidal, and they captured him, like they have him, but they don't want to kill him because he's such a genius. So what they do is they implant his brain into someone else's body, but not just their body, like he's sharing a brain, so that they have control over his actions, but he can feed them information. A lot more complicated than that, but yeah, that's what the first book is about. And I can't tell you what the second and third book are about because that would spoil things, but they are so cool. I love this world and how the people in it, and how people are not always straightforward villains, or sometimes they are. Yeah, it's pretty cool. Then I read Worn by Sophie Thanhauser. Had a little existential crisis about, like, if everything that we make clothes out of is so horrible, why are we wearing clothes anymore? It's just so what it is the history between different fabrics. And then the cultural and social history behind them as well, and the impact it has on people. And it's never really a good thing, especially like rayon fabric, and how like the mental health aspects that it affects, like it causes almost like schizophrenia. That was horrible to read about. And it had a lot of links, fabric has a lot of links to women's history as well, until it gets to be too profitable and men step in, right? So yeah, it was really interesting. I usually buy my clothes from the thrift store anyways. So like this shirt I brought from the thrift store, my pants I got from the thrift store. So I think that's the best way to go ethically around buying clothes. But there's no real other options to get around the human rights violations when it comes to clothing, unless corporations, want to step up and change things, right? So yeah, that book was interesting, definitely, a very thorough and interesting read as well. It wasn't like boring. It's nonfiction. Then I read 1984. I'm just gonna grab it off my shelf here. I reread it because I wanted to do my tag thing, and I'm in the middle, quite literally, in the middle of annotating it. So 1984, classic dystopian, about this world where everything is controlled. It's mostly about capitalism and 24/7 keeping people active and doing things and not letting them form personal relationships and personal thoughts, constantly monitoring them. What was the one thing that I really wanted to go into this after going into it, annotating it after reading it, is the way that people are portrayed and then their political beliefs, so how they're portrayed physically and how that ties to their political beliefs. I thought that was quite an interesting aspect in here. I noticed that, some people were described as, being larger bodied, but really interested in sports, and they were unthinking conservatives, devotees. And then like the more attractive, well-dressed people were following the ideology but knowing that it's BS. So it's quite interesting. And there's more to it. There's more to 1984 than just like clothing and stuff. But I thought that was an interesting way to look at it. I also read Learning to Walk in the Dark by Barbara Brown Taylor, and this is talking about like religion, faith, and other things, but not always. We always say, like, it's funny, in real time, going off on a little bit of a tangent here, they say, may the light be with you. And there's a lot of light imagery in religion, shining light on things, be a lamppost and all these kind of things. I know I'm not getting it right on, but I hope you know what I'm talking about. In religion, there's a lot of talk about light and staying out of the dark. And this is the importance of acknowledging the dark side of faith. And, going out, and at one chapter she wrote about, like, just going outside at night and, looking at the moon and spending time, away from light, physically, and emotionally, the dark things that we go through and how that can inform faith differently. It was really interesting. I appreciated it. I wish it was longer, and I wish it was less of a personal, not less personal stuff, but more not personal stuff. If you understand what I mean. If that personal stuff informed a larger picture. The book was too short, in my opinion. And then I finally finished Shadow of Night, which is book 2 in the All Souls trilogy by Deborah Harkness. The first book is called The Discovery of Witches, and the TV show is called that too. So, the first book is about a young woman who is a witch, but she can't access her powers. Seems to be a theme here. She can't access her powers. And then she falls in love with a vampire. I call it Twilight for adults. That's basically what it is. The second book, it's not too much of a spoiler, I think, to say they go back in time to Elizabethan times. It's quite cool because she's like having to adapt, and like they're trying to explain her accent is that she traveled a lot as a kid, so she doesn't have like a traditional medieval English accent, and she meets like Christopher Marlowe and William Shakespeare and Queen Elizabeth and other figures throughout history, so that was cool. It ultimately felt pointless at the end, though, because they didn't accomplish what they set out to do. So that was disappointing. I was like, what's the point of this book? What was the point? It's kind of cool meeting all these characters through, like, a fictional lens here and, all this stuff going on, but, like, the whole tension throughout was getting this task done. They didn't do the task. And they're thinking, okay, let's just go back and, whatever. What? So, that's it. That's all I'm gonna say about, those 10, 11 books. Let me know if you've read any of these and what your thoughts are on them, and thank you for watching.